How are you doing?
Very well.
So welcome to the book reading and signing of How to Make a Space Masquerade and Other Speculative Stories by Mazi Momo. Can I hear you clap? Okay, so before we begin, I am going to be reading Mazi's author's bio, just so we know who we have here. Mazi Momo is the pen name of journalist and creative writer Chagozie Momo. He has a keen interest in exploring human relationships in the far future and otherworldly realms. When he is not weaving tales of the extraordinary, Mazi can be found pursuing the truth in his journalistic endeavors. He believes that truth, both in journalism and speculative fiction, are key to balance. Mazi Momo is also the co-founder of Omenana Speculative Fiction Magazine, a platform for writers of the journey from Africa and the African diaspora. He is a keen lover of culture and tradition, which he tries to preserve through his stories. So first of all, I just want to say congratulations on being a published author.
Thank you very much.
I don't know if a lot of people know, but it is the journey to be an author is not easy at all. So I guess my first question is, how do you feel finally holding your book, your own writing from your head? You are holding it live in your hands. How does that feel?
Okay, it felt great. I know I was with my kids who were here. We traveled for the Christmas break, so we were at home when my sister came back with a copy, and that was the very first copy I saw. And I know we celebrated it because something I've looked forward to for a long time. I'm somebody who is not very, very comfortable with writing. I question it all the time, so it was difficult to gather the stories together and then get them out into the world. So it's probably one of the hardest things I've done. So I'm still kind of waiting for the feedback to come and for people to say, you messed up. You didn't do it well. So it's like a tension thing for me. So I feel great that it's out here now. I feel it's no longer in my hands anymore. It's left for people to read it, enjoy it, and then give me feedback and then judge it, whether good or bad. So it's a great feeling.
Okay, so speaking of the judging thing, like you said, I remember that when I was reading the blogs, it was very interesting because most of the comments from established authors, they were really good. How does that make you feel knowing that this set of authors that you like, that you've even read their stories, they all agree that your story is not just really good, but it's also worth recommending and writing a blog for? How did that make you feel?
Yeah, so when my publisher sent me some of the blogs, I was surprised. So the question I asked was, are you sure it's my book they're talking about? Because the praise was like, I am like, are you sure it's my book? They didn't make any mistake. But I take that to be a function of people who enjoyed the stories that I write, how I write them, and it made me feel good, but also it made me question, are they being truthful to me? And they just tried to make me feel good like I felt when I had it.
Yes, I think it's that thing that people always say about writers always having this imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
Like no matter how good people tell you are, there's just this, what if you're just lying to me?
Yeah.
But I have read the book and I don't think that they're lying to me.
Okay.
So,
I'll take that.
How did you come to like stories, and how did you so it's one thing to like stories. I think everybody where things fall apart, all of that. But what made you decide to, okay, it is speculative fiction I want to do?
So I've always enjoyed reading. I was fortunate enough to have a dad who had a mini library. So we had most of the African writers' service books. We had a lot of book encyclopedias. So I grew up reading from when I read my very first novel when I was in primary 3. And I can't forget the name. It's Undesirable Elements. one of the pace setter books. I was in primary three. I went for a holiday to one of my uncle's house, and then I went with the book and I read it, and I've never stopped since then. So for me, speculative fiction came by chance. I know when I was like in JS1, JS2, I was doing a lot of Maze and Boom, and then I went on to Agatha Christie, James Hadley Chase, and then from there I went to reading a bit of science fiction, fantasy that I didn't understand at that point in time, but somehow I found myself leaning more towards those science fiction and fantasy books. Up to by the time I was like in SS1, SS2, that was mostly what I was reading. So it's natural for me to like move on to wanting to write speculative fiction. And you know, if you read most of our own stories, if you read most of the, or if you listen to most of the tales that our mothers and fathers tell in the villages, you find out that most times it is speculative in nature. There's always this witch, there's always this spirit and all of that stuff, and that's speculative fiction, that's fantasy or magic realism. So I kind of felt that, okay, if I'm going to write my own story, it's going to be a mixture of those stories that our fathers and mothers tell us, and then the modern aspect of it. And because I like science fiction, so it was kind of a marriage. So my story tends to have a bit of both worlds.
So speaking of your stories, we'll get to reading it now. But before we start, I just want to ask, do you have a favorite story out of the 12 collection?
Yeah, I do. Actually do have a favorite.
Is this something you can say? I don't
Yeah, I
say
actually
it.
can. I have. So, going not favorite, I'll probably say the one that I enjoyed writing the most. And that's the very last story there. Is that the last one? Let me be sure. Yes, Alika's Dilemma.
What was your favorite story?
That was one I enjoyed the most writing. So I remember I wrote that story in about 1 hour at one sitting. So it was just fluid, and I enjoyed the language, I enjoyed the scene I was painting, I enjoyed the world I was creating basically. And in my mind, it was supposed to be like the start of something big. It was supposed to be like the first of so many stories that are going to link to that same world and that same scene that I was creating, and those characters that I created. So that was when I enjoyed writing the most. So
was that the first one?
No, it wasn't the first one, but I still remember vividly where I was when I wrote that one. The other ones, I can't say for sure where I wrote the other ones because I didn't write them in one city. But that's the one I still remember where I was. Probably kind of the time. I still remember the laptop I wrote it on. So yeah, I enjoyed that story so much.
Yes.
Writing it though, so but not about like in terms of what the story is. Yeah.
Since that is your favorite story, that is what we are going to read.
Oh, you should have asked me which one I want to read.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so we have to read it. We are going to read it.
Okay.
So let's read your favorite story first.
Okay. So let me start. The day this adventure began was not remarkable. I was busy cleaning new fruit woods. My master took a sauce from an antelope hunter in the Twin Forest. Having eaten a stingy meal of roasted locusts and tapioca meal for you Rolanders. And those late night vigils outside her homestead, the water fetching and barn making for her father, everyone is doing something for some girl's family these days. I even spent the whole of last market day tilling your mother's vegetable patch for cheap. I called myself off, hoping he had not caught the significance of my blunder. But one look at his smiling face, I knew that the harm had already been done. Relax, Obele. I know about you and my sister. I'm not blind too. You two have always liked each other. We all knew it would lead to this. Oh yes, come. Okay, so that's I just read that part because, like I said, it's a story I enjoyed writing when I wrote it. So it's a story of young romance, a story of culture. So one thing I do with my stories, I try a lot to like blend the culture as I can remember them and make up some too to make it more spicy and then put it in the story. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much for that wonderful reading. So I have 2 questions, but I don't know if I should ask the next one based off that culture thing that you said. Or I should just ask this then ask culture on later. Okay. Okay. Let me touch on the culture. So how to make a space masquerade? The story itself, which as we would have it, is the title of the book. So it's based off a story about masquerades, and because I am Igbo, so I remember just being in the village, and we had this. It was a thing. It was a festival where you see masquerades, just chasing you. So and I know that this story was it reminded me a lot about that. So I just wanted to ask, was that also an inspiration for you when you wrote that story? Was that where it came from?
Yes. So that story is okay. There's a secret behind that story, and the secret is that there's a true element to the story. So the story of young boys making masquerades in the bush and trying to compete with each other is actually something that happened a long time ago in a village in Enugu State, and I was part of those young boys who did it, because my dad used to take us home every other December way back then for the Christmas break, so I kind of joined young boys doing that when it was still popular. I think that doesn't happen anymore, but at least we caught that tailwind of it when it was like going away. So it's something I wanted to preserve, and this was one way that I could preserve that. So children these days, when they look for inspiration of what to do, what to play with, they look at things they see in the environment. The environment of 20, 30, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, you had masquerades being the main attraction, the main, what do you call it now? What you use for entertainment. It's like the major thing. And also what you use for enforcement of laws and all that. So children emulate that. So when they see the big masquerade, they also want to make their own little masquerade that also goes around just like the big masquerade. And that's what that story is about. So it's me taking that culture, taking that experience, and now sort of translating it into the far future in space where children are actually doing that too. In the story, you see the bit where they encountered a big masquerade and then had to run away. That didn't happen, but I had to put that too because it tends to happen too in real life. Yeah.
So I want to speak on my favorite stories now.
Okay.
So the first time I picked this book up to read, I remember the first story I read was The Rainmaker.
Okay.
And there was something about that story that when I finished, I almost shed a tear because it was so like I was struggling with the main character too.
Yeah.
And when he finally got what he wanted, I was like, finally, thank God. So I think that story is really, really, really good. So what was it? I want to know what the inspiration was.
Okay, so now I think I did not know what the inspiration was until I had written the story and published it, and then I went back to read it again, and I could see elements of Frank Herbert's Dune. I didn't have that in mind when I was writing the story, but I knew I wanted to write a story about a young person's struggle with culture. So, but another inspiration of it was in the southeast of Nigeria, there are villages where you find people who say they are rain makers. So, like if you want to have a big festival or a big event, you call them to stop the rain or make the rain fall at a certain time. So I thought about a situation where you have these rain makers and then they've caused upheaval. Instead of stopping rain, or making rain fall a bit, they actually caused a flood and then had to run away. And then what will that story be? And that's basically what that story was about. Now, at a point in time, the family lost that ability to make rain. So this young man was now left with this idea of, they say we are rain makers. I've never been able to make rain. My father has never been able to make rain. Are we truly rain makers? And then that was just what the story was built about. But like most of my stories actually goes back to a culture that existed, a story that we are told about people who are rain makers. So it's like imagining somebody who is from that kind of family. And then like I did with that story, taking them into space, into a far future and then letting it break, more or less. Yeah. But like I said, there were elements of Dune in it that I did not see when I was writing it. It was later on when I was like, this reference must have come from Dune. Subconsciously, I must have like, I wanted to create a desert planet, and then sort of pulled references from stories I've read before without even thinking about it. But everyone seems to like that story. It's not like one of my favorites, though.
Really? I like it.
Yeah, people like it. It's not my favorite.
And I think that's often the thing with like writers or authors. Like the stories you don't even, that's what people really like.
So it. I think I wrote it to be very accessible. I was conscious about how I wrote that particular story. I wanted it to be accessible. I wanted it to be something that resonates, and then I spent a lot of time doing the word building too, because I would, like most of my story, I try to, the words I create, I want to use them again, and that's the same world, the same planet that the space Masquerade is set in, but at a different time, at the time when there is already rain and it was polishing, but that was before when there was no rain.
So moving on to my second favorite story, Deletion.
Oh. Okay.
So I know that Deletion is partly about people being obsessed with, not aging, youth, and and to the extent to which they will put money, technology, all of that, just to not get old.
Yeah.
So I just want to ask a question for that. So if an inventor or billionaire in the past or present, wants to explore long life technology, who is your money on?
Who, like the person that would succeed at doing it?
Yes. I would also distribute that.
So I think one thing I've noticed from studying a bit of history and reading books that deal with aging and stuff is that most people who find the fountain of youth tend to want to hoard it. They tend to not want to share. They want to like keep it to themselves and not have other people partake in it. So, who? Elon Musk. He's got the money and he's got the drive to.
So, do you think that there is any story? Do you think that it's so easy for people to sleep on in Gen Z codes, like to underrate or okay, this is just, but you feel like no, I want you to really read the story. I'm going to end. This story is really good. Why are people not paying attention to this story?
Which story would I say that is? I would think one of the very, very short ones. There are two of them, and that would be another way to say goodbye. It's a very short one, and I think it's one story that you probably overlook the message. Yes, you probably wouldn't get what it's talking about until you kind of think about it. And it's something that does happen. It's a story that talks about, it's not telepathy, but like the belief that people can communicate with their loved ones when they pass on. It's actually a belief that is commonplace here. It's something people are not going to question. My husband died last summer after he died. He came to visit me. So that's the story. And then beyond that too, it also shows that this communication between loved ones and spirit is not something that place and time and distance can make more difficult. So you can see how many light years away the girl is from Earth, but still the message came before the actual message came from her brother. So that's one story. Another one would be A Long Journey Home.
Yeah, I don't think anybody should sleep on A Long Journey Home.
Yeah, so that's So I think that one is it's the message is not very subtle. I don't think it's subtle. It's there. Yeah.
Okay,
it's a story I wanted to write for a long time. It took me years. I wanted to write it, and I think I started thinking about writing it after a governor from the Southwest died. So he was he died, and then so they were taking his corpse home on a plane, and the plane now crashed. That was some years ago, and people now died too. Was it governor? Yeah, a governor, yeah, former governor, I think, one of the Southwest states. It was a long time ago, probably like 20 years ago. Thereabout. I'm not too sure, but I remember if I think about it. So I wanted to write that story because it's something we hear too. You hear of cops that don't want to go home. Maybe they feel aggrieved, and then the car gets somewhere and the car gets spoiled, and then it's okay, get a key for the cops, do this, then the car will start and stuff like that. So yeah, so I do this stuff where I take these stories and then I throw them into the future and then see what happens.
I've actually heard about the cops flogging one.
Yeah.
I think the one that happened in my village, I think they had to go and feed some people before they could bury the person. It was just, well, you know, when you're young and you hear the story, you're just like, okay. So I was actually going to ask a question about A Long Journey Home.
Yeah.
Because it's also like one of my favorite reads. But I think we've answered it.
Okay.
I was going to ask what part of tradition inspired you to tell that story. But maybe you could still touch a bit
so I do with my stories, most of them, I try very hard to do this. Because I actually see my writing as a way for me to preserve my culture. So writing the way I do, I try very hard to like small, big, large, like my son says, and just drop those stuff in there. For instance, there is the idea that you can hire somebody to mourn if somebody dies, and maybe you feel you are not everybody can cry in public, not everybody can express emotions. So, and you feel the person needs to be sent off with enough money. You hire a mourner, professional mourner who comes to cry, and they are paid for that. And then also in the village, it's like there's always this competition to know, have you cried? Your mom died, your dad died, your auntie died, you've not cried, or you cry. You get, and you see people being forced to cry and stuff, and then people pretending that they're crying. So I had to put that in where they had to bring somebody to mourn, because that was one way to pacify the cops, or to sort of make the cops feel a little bit more inclined to go home. So they had to get somebody that had an affinity or a relationship with that person when the person was alive, and then have her cry. So that's a culture that I brought in there. And then I also had to bring the idea of Nigerian and African enterprise, where in a far off space, somebody just saw opportunity and then built a news corner that was very, very big to get. So that's things that I do. So I'm conscious about this when I write seriously. And I want to also try to do that. I sort of downplay the science. So the science is not huge in my stories. It's like in the background to like situate it. But that's not the biggest thing about it. The biggest thing about it is the culture, is the cosmology.
And I like that, sir, because it is true. When you read the stories, it's the culture that stands out to you. Yes, and then the science is just like setting the background. Yes. So speaking of culture, there's a story called Family Meeting.
I think that's the most controversial story there. That's the one I told my daughter not to read.
Oh yes.
Yeah, she has not read that one.
Okay, so the thing is, for me even, I think, so Family Meeting reads into parental control.
Yes, same people.
Yes, same people. So it feels more like a continuation. So I wanted to ask, was there a reason for that?
For the continuation?
Yes, for making it two separate stories.
Okay, yes. Yes. So I wanted to, so which came first? I have to think of the one that came first. I can't remember the one that was the first one. I think Family Meeting was the first one, but I'm not too sure. No, it wasn't. The second one was the first one. Not all of it, but I think I wrote it so like halfway before with Family Meeting. So the idea was it wouldn't fit in if I made it one story, because the writing styles are different. One was in third person, one was in first person, and then also the characters, the main characters for each story was different. So you had Dadzi as Madoka Dadzi as the main character for the first one. The The second one is now his son, who is the main character, through whose eyes we saw the story unfold. So the idea for the story is just like a lot of my stories, more like thinking about in the future, are we going to be more Western than we are? So my argument is no. We are going to have a lot of Western values, but we're also going to keep a lot of our own values. So in that story, what you will find is, you find a modern man who's been to Mars, an astronaut who comes back and then has an issue with his wife, and instead of going to court, felt the need to call his family, and his family is his uncle, his wife's uncle, his wife, the uncle's wife, and his sister, who now came to the house to have a conversation about the issue that he has. And that was the story basically. It's a story that I'm not sure I succeeded as well as I wanted to. I think I got to a point I got tired more or less, because I felt I was waffling, and I was like, let's end it, because I ended it unresolved, more or less unresolved. And then I needed to continue and finish the second story. That was literally the first one, and then try to do the resolution of that first story in the second one, which I think I did at the end, where you found out who the boy actually is.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I think so. At the end, I kind of expected the boy to, expose things, but it seemed like in the end, like they were just going to continue like that.
No, well, I think I just left it open for interpretation for the reader to kind of plot what they think the next story is going to, where the story is going to go to. But one thing I wanted to do, which I hope I achieved, is to ensure that the boy comes of age, comes into himself, to sort of become his own person, to sort of become more whole and become more, because the whole idea was, this is somebody who has issues with identity. Who am I really? Actually doesn't know. Even though he's very, very smart, reads a lot, has done a lot of games, has more knowledge than people even way older than him, but he still struggles with identity because of the peculiarity of his birth. So I sort of wanted him to get to a point where he's like, this is who I am. And I felt he did that, and then also accept that this is what I like and I want to do it, and then go back to doing it.
So I think it's time for another book reading.
To my audience of 5, okay?
This time, we would ask you what you want to read.
Okay. Okay, I would prefer to read the novella in the collection, which is The Coming of the Autumn, and I will just read the very for the introductory passage to that. And that is one of the stories that I enjoyed writing. I think I lost like 2 drafts of it, and then had to try to write it off from my head, and I'm not sure I did as well as it was initially. But I liked the story, and I had to change. So I had to change the names of the autumn. Before it was not men. So, and then I felt there may be some controversy in saying not men. So I changed it to autumn, which is quite good. And that's where the cover image comes from. Okay. I was 14 years old when the autumn destroyed the world as I knew it. It was the last day of the 4-day week, and the sun had risen later than usual. The 2 moons of Vajrayana still bejeweled the heavens. One a silver arc in the eastern sky, the other a red orb that brightened the western sky. So,
I had started reading the next.
Okay, the next one. No.
Yes.
Let's not pause with the next one. Yeah, so this, okay, go ahead, ask your question.
No.
So this particular story is one that okay, why did I enjoy writing it? I think this was one story that I tried to use to kind of, not experiment, but more like to showcase my style of writing, which tends to be more descriptive, which I hoped would paint a picture of the scene that people are seeing as they are reading. So I try to do a lot of that with this story. And then it's also a coming of age story. I don't know what inspired it. I think I just started writing, and then was it was just going until it got to the point it got to. Yeah, it's a novella. It's probably it is not probably the longest story in the collection. I liked it. I don't know if people do. I hope people do like it, but I do like it. And because it's long, people may struggle with it a little bit.
So, as we wrap up, I think I just have one question.
Okay.
So, like we said when we started this book reading, the journey towards being an author is not an easy one.
Yeah, it's not.
And so a lot of people, like we said again, might think, oh, it's just so straightforward. You write, then get a publisher. That's it. So I guess my question is, could you tell us about your process through submitting the manuscript, finally knowing that it was going to be published, then it's been out in the world, and how that has just been for you? Do you feel relief that, oh, finally this thing is out, it's out, let me go and face my work? Or what has been your state through this process?
Okay, so I don't feel relief, I feel scared. So yeah, because it is speculative fiction and it's something that we've struggled with in Nigeria for a long time. I had to set up a Menana because I felt people were not giving space for people who write that genre to publish and get renowned. And it's been great. We have this small community. Almost everybody's out of the country now, but then we've been kind of working with each other. So my fear has always been, is it going to be accepted? Is it going to be seen as worth reading? Are people going to question it, which people have done in the past, thinking that it is something that is not as good as literary fiction, or thinking that is not well written? So the thing I always say is that it is a story. It has all the elements that literary fiction has. The only difference is it is set in a place and time, or that is not like ours, where things work different. Either it's set in the far future, it's set in a different universe. There's a lot of magic in it, but it's still a story that has all the same elements that every other story has, that can also be enjoyed. Because you hear people say, I don't like speculative fiction, and they've never read one before. But if you look at the cinema these days, almost every movie that is out there, that is trending, is speculative fiction. Whether it's the Marvel story, or the story from DC, or it's all the Game of Thrones and the rest of them, they are all fantasy, science fiction, and the like. But people still say, I don't like it, I don't read it, but they watch the movies. So that was my fear. Is it going to be accepted by the public who I wrote it for? Because I didn't write it for the West, which is why when it came time for me to submit, I never submitted to a Western publisher, because my feeling has always been we have to start from there before we go, instead of going out and coming in. So I'd say I have to do it from here. So it took me time to write. It took years, and then when I collected it, I sent them out to friends, other writers who sort of looked at it, gave suggestions on what they think I can do with it. Accepted some, didn't accept some. And then I sent it to publishers. I got 2 feedbacks, both positive, but then I made the choice of going with narrative because of what they said about the book, because of how much interested they were in the stories. Because for me, that's the most important thing. Publishing is not, for me, it's not the big deal. It's the person publishing, do they have faith in the book? Are they willing to invest in it, to just put it out there? Because for me, I think it's something that people should read. Like I said, my struggle now is to see how people receive it when they read it. But my advice is always read it first. Yeah, so it's out there in the world, and then I'm waiting for feedback. Yeah.
Okay. So A lot of people know that you're a journalist.
Yeah, that's my 9 to 5.
Well, what is this with authors and just having a 9 to 5 and their writing is just...
Okay, so for me it's peculiar, but not so different from a lot of other journalists and writers. So I've always had that deep love for writing, but I've always wanted to be a journalist. That's the only thing I can remember. If you ever asked me from primary school, I wanted to be a journalist. And my father tried very hard to make sure I didn't become a journalist. He forced me to go and do science secondary school, kept me for 4 years after secondary school to ensure I go and do medicine. I refused. And then when I could make money to pay for my own jam and write jam, I did. And I went to university. I didn't do medicine. So I came out and then found my way into journalism because I've always wanted to be a journalist. So, but it's also close to writing, which for me it makes it a little bit more difficult for me to pursue this as a hobby fully, because most times when I come home, I still have used up all my juice at work. So to now sit down and write, I have a lot of stories in my head that I want to write, but then to now sit down and write, it's becoming very difficult. So that's the process for me. Yeah. So I enjoy both.
Does anybody have a question? Okay, your question.
Yes, very quickly. Which story in the collection are you most likely to develop into a standalone novel?
That's a very good question and a very interesting one. So I will say two. So I will say that the coming of the autumn, and then Alika's dilemma. Those two. Yes, I'm definitely going to have a novel set in the world where we had Rainmaker.
Yes.
I'm definitely going to have.
Yes, we want that. Yes.
Everybody likes Rainmaker.
Yes, we want that.
Yeah. So yeah, so I'm definitely going to have a story set there, but yeah, well, I think it's going to be me wanting juggling between what I prefer and then what the public prefer, because then who do I serve as the public? It still allows me to do the same thing. But if you see, most of the stories are connected. I try to connect them one way or the other. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for this.
Thank you.
So I'm going to wrap up with this last one.
Mm-hmm.
What is next for Mazmon? Like, no pressure, but what should we look forward to? Or are you currently working on something? Would like to know if you are.
So yes, okay. I'm working on another short story collection, and then I'm working on a novel. The struggle now is that which one do I pay attention to more? So there's that divided attention. I'm more inclined to put out a short story collection because it also gives me time to still do my experiments that I've been doing. I have a couple of stories that I think are fit for that. But then the novel, I've worked on it for a couple of years. My issue with it, because it's not purely speculative fiction, that's my issue with it. So that's why I'm sort of tracking my foot, because I've sort of made the name as this guy who promotes this genre, and then people would be happy to see me put out something literally, which, yeah. So I'm working on something. I have hope that before the end of the year, one of them should be with the publisher, and then we'll see how it goes. Yeah.
So we're looking forward to that.
Thank you very much.
So I just want to say thank you very much for.
Thank you very much for having me.
So
my audience.
Thank you very much to our audience. So we've come to the end of our book reading and signing. Yeah. And yes, How to Make a Space Masquerade is available everywhere in the world.
On Amazon.
It's on Amazon. So please do get a copy of How to Make a Space Masquerade. You would not regret it. Thank you very much.
You have a question?
What's your question?
What's your question?
Yeah?
What do I do? What did I join them? I told you I'm going to add you to this Masquerade Society very soon.
So the what?
To the society.
Masquerade Society.
So it's fun to do. That's why I did it. It's fun. You don't like Masquerade?
Has he ever
Because
seen
Masquerade flogged
That's it,
him,
what?
that's why.
Yeah, Masquerade flogged him in the
Oh,
last year.
they almost beat me too. It wasn't
Oh yeah,
even
it's
funny.
over.